Do you love this podcast? Do you love the information that we give you with a little sense of humor, some nuggets, some fun? Guess what? It happens every day, 24 hours a day inside Endurance Nation. Endurance Nation has been helping athletes just like you achieve their age group goals, whether it's finishing their first marathon or Boston qualifying, finishing their first triathlon or doing an Ironman at the World Championships, or doing ultra runs, gravel races, etc. Many cases during the summer months, we have athletes racing all over the country, in fact, the globe, at events of all different varying shapes and sizes. We can do that because the framework for how we train, how we build athletes, educate them, and support them with training plans and digital access to coaching and their peers is unparalleled. No one else does it like Endurance Nation does it. When you become a member of the team, you get access to not only the great coaching support, our training plans, and our resources, but to peers, people just like you who love the adventure, love challenging themselves, and are on this growth trajectory of personal excellence. Whether you're 25 years old and getting started or 65-year-old and sharpening the saw, we are here to help you out. You can learn more and apply to join the team at endurancenation.us/join. That's www.endurancenation.us/join. I look forward to seeing your application.
We get with it. All right, fantastic. Hey everyone, Coach Patrick here, Endurance Nation, back with another race podcast, race interview. Our guest today, Vincent, who just raced the Ironman World Championships in Nice. The last time a World Championships was held in Nice was so long ago, it's almost hard to remember. We live in a world where Kona is just the thing. It's not even a World Championships, it's just Kona. And that was not the case for the men this year. And Vincent is arguing that actually we should go check it out. First, Vincent, welcome to the pod. How are you?
I'm good, Patrick.
I'm doing super well. And congratulations. Can you give people just some quick facts on your race and how things played out, just so we have a context?
Yeah, so it's not necessarily the race I wanted in terms of time, but
Right.
That's the race I got, and I loved it. So it was held in Nice, so south of France, early September 10th. The swim is very much like Kona, gorgeous. You swim in the Mediterranean Sea. Swam a little bit over 70 minutes. No wetsuit.
Okay.
We learned at 5 o'clock in the morning that the water was too warm, so no wetsuit. The bike, very hilly, so it's in the Préalpes, the southern tip of the Alps. It's not hills, it's mountains, and there's a big difference. And I learned the hard way. I was based on best bike slip, best bike split, and also me talking to people. I had estimated I would do probably 6.5 hours. I ended up doing close to 7.5 hours. It was brutal, but that was a world championship, so that's probably what you want. And then the run was 2K, so 4 loops of 10.5 kilometers around the Promenade des Anglais, which is basically, you have the Mediterranean Sea and the board that is just long, and it's gorgeous. Very flat, no shade, a lot of people, and it was a very hot day. And again, that's not the run I wanted. That was a lot of walking, but at least I gave all I had. And so that was a little bit over 5.5 hours. So if you do the math, it's 14.5 hours. That's probably my slowest race ever. But that is the one that I don't know, probably enjoy the most for many different reasons. And we'll probably talk about them. But no, that was an awesome day. I know a lot of people were, and probably even me, were questioning, is Nice the right place to have a world championship? There is a history because a long time ago, Nice was a little bit like Kona, where the sport really started and picked up, and raced and won 10 times in Nice in the 80s and early 90s. So there's a strong tradition of triathlon. But it's not Kona. But I think it's different. And I would make the case that you don't need to replicate Kona. You just need to find another experience which is as special as Kona. And you can have Kona and Nice, and maybe later in the future, Nice or something else. But for now, it's Nice for another time. So the women will race 2 times in 24 and 26, and men will race another time in 2025. So that is your opportunity to qualify and go to Nice in 2025.
Okay. Outstanding. I like that. First of all, thank you. And thank you for reporting. I like your perspective of that. It's not about replacing Kona. That's the point of Kona or of Nice. There is only one place such as that place. And the idea that the search for the future world championships has to be just like the thing that you already have is such a tired view. When you ask someone like, oh, we're going to get you a new car. What kind of car do you want? They're like, I want just like the old one. And like, we don't make new ones like the old ones. Like, you get a new one. It's different. It's better. But people don't want to let go of the old one. I appreciate that. And I do want to click in, we'll do it in a second, into the course itself. Because you're right, it's a very different beast. And it wasn't lost on me when I was talking with Matt behind the scenes for one of our Dude Guy episodes. But actually, a lot of the elite men couldn't make it that weekend. And my guess is they did the math and we're like, this is not going to, I'm not the kind of person who races on that course and it will not be a good showing for me. So I'll go to this wedding instead. Or I just so happen that I think my calf is a little tight right now. Things that you would never hear before Kona. No one was ever like, oh, I wish I could race Kona this year. What? Like my shoulder's feeling like a little funky. So I'll see you next year. Like that was just never a thing. So I think that is a testament to the strength of the course as well. For sure. What was just out of curiosity, what was the vibe like? How was that? I don't know how big Nice is. Kona's super small. What was that like for atmosphere leading into the race?
I am from Paris. I'm from the north of France, and we have a very strong negative bias against French. Besides that, I would say that it was awesome. Okay, Nice is a beautiful city, and also the venue was perfect. The finish line was on the Promenade des Anglais. You cannot make it more touristy. Very close to what they call the Old Town, so the Vieux Nice, the Old Nice, which is a lot of small streets with a lot of cafes and restaurants, no cars, so a lot of people. Early September was still a great time because you had a lot of tourists, but you didn't have kids. So it was more because kids went back to school. So you had more like an adult crowd, teenagers, young adults, but no kids. And I have nothing against kids, but it was a bit different and probably better for the race. The big difference with Kona is I went to Kona last year, and probably it wasn't the best year to be in Kona because there were so many people, men and women competing over 2 days, and the triathletes or Ironman took over the island. And sometimes I had great memories, but sometimes you would see certain behaviors that you wish didn't see, like people feeling they were entitled because Kona is triathlon, so we are triathletes, we own everything, and it's a little bit like that. But in Nice is a very big town. It's you have several 100,000 people living there, and they do well without Ironman. So we blended very nicely. You could see a lot of people with the T-shirt, and you recognize the people. But I thought it fit very well because it was not over the top. It was just a lot of people living their life. And it was big enough that it was not like Kona last year where it was too many triathletes. Here, you still had many tourists and a lot of people living there, people going to school, people going to work. And so the vibe, I thought, was really positive. And the weather was perfect. So it was warm, which probably wasn't great for the race, but that's what you get. But for outside the race, it was good because you could really enjoy being outside. Everybody was outside, eating out and having a drink, and so to picture those streets where you have no cars, but you have a big tramway which takes people from the airport to the center of town, and a little bit like Paris or Amsterdam, where they are pushing the cars out. So it makes it a very pleasant experience for pedestrians and tourists. And then a lot of cafes, you eat out, you sit outside, you enjoy the nice day, you look at people. That's what we do in France, and that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's great to hear. Like you mentioned the history. I think sometimes people forget, especially if you haven't raced abroad, about not only about that history of racing, but also how endurance sports in general is so much more celebrated in Europe than it is here. You know, if folks had got a chance to catch some of the clips from the ultra running World Championships, some of those runs look like the Tour de France climbs. When I did Ironman Austria, the downtown section there, people were all about it. I thought you would have thought I was an elite athlete. Like people just really get into it. And there's something about that vibe, which is it's just energetic, right? The people bring the energy instead of just saying, hey, this place is great. There's this sort of this connection as well. So there's a longstanding tradition. Okay, let's talk a little bit about your race because I do want to unpack the bike course and the run course for people so they do understand what it is. I think the bike course has 8,500 feet of climbing-ish, some version of that. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's 200 meters, so close to 8,000 feet. So if you want, I can start super quickly with the swim. The swim is to reconcile with what you were just talking about.
Okay.
You have to imagine this huge, very long boulevard called Promenade des Anglais, and the start was very close to the Vieux Nice, so the very touristy place. So you had a lot of people. It was crazy. Honestly, your comment about the Tour de France, I'll get to that about the run later, but already for the swim, you would turn around and it It was like a sea of people, and it was like 6:30 in the morning, and it was crazy. So you're like, oh my God. So very energized, a lot of people. And so the swim was no wetsuit, went relatively fast, not super difficult, no waves, it was relatively flat. There was a little bit of wind towards the end, but it was like a 4 out of 10 or 3 out of 10, in terms of difficulty. Salt water, so it's very salty. It's probably more saltier than Kona. So you have to be sure that you don't drink too much water, or then you have to drink a lot of plain water afterwards. So that went relatively fast and fine. The transition area was a very long rectangle, but everything was carpeted. Yeah, I didn't say, but the beach in Nice is not fun. It's not sand, but those kind of rocks, which they really hurt your feet. So they don't round, but it's not fun. But they had carpeted everything, so you could run as if you were running on sand. And then the whole transition area was carpeted. It was long, but it was perfectly fine. Then you'd start the bike. And then, so the bike course was basically 10 miles to go to so very flat to go to the first hill. And the first hill was probably, I don't remember, I would say maybe 20, 30 minutes climbing. Some portions were very steep, I would say 15-20%, not for long, but just to good warm-up. And then you would go down for about 15 minutes. Then you start the ascent towards the Col de l'Ecre. And on paper, it looked like you go up, go down, then you go up probably an hour and a half, and then it's flat on the plateau. And then you go down a little hill, and then you go down to Nice. So it's not, but in reality, nothing is flat. And so we went through the first hill, some very steep sections, but then it was fine. And after a while, I was like, oh my God, maybe we've already started the big climb because I'm feeling good and everything. We were barely at the top of the first one. It's okay, that's going to be a long day. So we start the second climb, and I think, I don't remember exactly, I would say easily an hour and a half of climbing. So not very steep, between 4 and 6%, but it doesn't stop. Some sections were in the shade, some sections under the sun, and it's just long, and it's a grind. And then, so we finally make it to the Col de l'Ecre. Then it goes down a little bit and continues going up, of course. So you get to the plateau. And on the plateau, nothing is flat. So it looks flat on when you look at the course on paper, but it's always a false flat, going down, going up. And so you can never rest. And in my case, I was riding with my tri-bike, and it's not very comfortable if I had to do it again, I would probably ride a road bike. And you probably had 30% at least people riding road bikes. So you had a little bit of everything. You had tri-bikes with discs, you had road bikes with and you had normal road bikes. You had a little bit of everything. I think for someone like me, well over 7 hours, it's probably better to the road bike. And that's what Nam did. He did much better than I did. So you're very tensed due to the position, climbing for a long time. I mean, it's not super comfortable, the tri-bike. But then when we got to the flat sections, I was like, okay, now it's my time to enjoy having the tri-bike and being in the aero bars. But it didn't work well because I was already tired and tensed. And so I couldn't really stay long in the aero position. And then you would always go up. So sometimes you would go down, but most of the time it felt you would go up. And then when it was flat or even going down, it felt like you were having this headwind, a very unforgiving course. But anyways, I think we got to the section, or at least I got to the section where I was like, okay, now it's going down. It was well over 3 hours. It was not 3 hours of pure climbing, but most of it was climbing and being tensed on the bike. Yeah, so if you look at what you're showing, the flat at the beginning, and then you go up, then you have this 10 minutes downhill, and then goes up to the Col de l'Ecre. And then on paper, the next section is flat, but it's not really. Then you go down, and this section, which is in light blue, is probably why you want to race there, because it's gorgeous. It's already the Alps, so you don't have a lot of cars, you don't have a lot of houses. It's very mineral, and it's just beautiful. It's really pretty. But it is also a little bit dangerous because if you fall over the guardrails, you are probably dead. And I'm not kidding. You have to be also very focused on the way down. It's not you have this almost highway and you can just relax and you just need to go straight. Here, that's why a road bike is probably better because you're braking often and then you're turning all the time. So a tri-bike for me was, again, it just added to being tensed and being, so you can never relax. You can never not being focused on the road, either because you're climbing and you're grinding it out, or you're going down and you need to be very concentrated on what you're doing. So you can never relax. So that's in blue that you are showing. And then about 120 kilometers. So I don't know what that's like, 3-4 is probably like 7% of the course. Then they have this 10K, so 6-mile climb, which is in the last section in yellow, a little bit before. It's like 10, again, it doesn't really show here, but you're already tired and you're like 10K or 6 miles of climbing. It's not super hard, but it just breaks your leg and your spirit even more. And then when you get to the top, you're like, finally, I'm done with climbing. Now I can just relax. Then you're going to a section which I didn't like because the pavement is not great. The pavement was okay before, was not an issue, but the last downhill descent to Nice, you go through a lot of several little villages. And so you have speed bumps, you have potholes, you have the pavement is not great. Again, you have to be very careful. Some people say that it was pretty dangerous. It's not dangerous if you stay within yourself, but you're tired and you just want to get it done. And so it's stressful. It's not dangerous in the sense that if you have a wreck, you're going to kill yourself. That was before. It's just that you don't want to fall because you don't. And so that's where I got the flat. So my lesson learned is you should ride a road bike and you should be careful. I was riding 28 tires and section was not great. So I made the mistake of overinflating my tires. I was riding probably over 95 PSI. And my bike store told me that's one of the reasons probably I got a flat. So it was not comfortable because I could feel every little bump on the road. So anyways, it's got a flat, which everybody should know how to change a flat. And I'm glad I knew that it would happen. It's like very hard to explain, but I had an intuition that I had raced many races and I had never had a flat. So I was like, I know it's going to happen. And it did happen. And I changed it relatively fast. So, but you didn't have a lot of bike support on the course. So you are on your own. They had told us basically you are expected to know how to change a flat. And I didn't see many motorbikes to help. So very few. So basically you are on your own. So it's a little bit stressful because you're like, I'm nearly done. And if I mess up, I had only 2 cartridges. If something goes wrong, then it's over almost, or I have to walk to the next station. And so anyway, more stress. Anyways, I fixed it. I managed to finish. But at the end, I could not even stay in aero position. I wanted it to be over. And I thought I did okay with my nutrition. But after talking to Matt, my nutrition was calibrated for 6.5 hours. But I spent an hour more. And the last maybe hour and a half, I didn't drink as much. I should have. I never felt on the run that I was underfueled, but maybe I was. And so it was a beast of a course, but it's really scenic. I'm sure you saw the pros and the cameras behind. It's really pretty. I think except this last section, the last downhill, but it's a beautiful course. So what I learned is road bike, don't inflate your tires too much, and train in the mountains. So if I had to do it again, I would join you in Mallorca and Tenerife, and I would eat mountain for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, because where I live in Georgia, it's hilly, not Florida, so we have hills, but we don't have mountains. And it's very different to climb for 5-10 minutes and to climb for 2 hours. And next time I will do a camp and I will spend way more time we have the Appalachian Mountains, not far from here. And I went there once. I should have gone many more times. But
many times. Yes. Well, I feel don't take it too hard on yourself as your coach. Like we didn't have a lot of baseline or information to prepare you for it. Part of what we're doing here is capturing that so we iteratively get better. But I agree. I think when I remember the first time I went to Mallorca and rode some of those climbs that were 45 minutes or an hour, which aren't even that great compared to some of the work you're doing in France. remember being like, oh, I just need to be fitter. So the next year I came back and my FTP was higher. I was ready. It still didn't matter because there's just a different style and attitude you have to bring to riding in the mountains. It's a different than just being like, I'm strong. Great. That's great. Strong things break against mountains, right? Like they're mountains. But I think just having that perspective so huge. And I can see that looks like a beautiful, to your point, like if we were in France and you were like, let's go ride this, let's go do a long day on the bike. That looks amazing. Just in the context of an Ironman, that's a tall order. I know you had some challenges with the nutrition in terms of, since it was so much longer, you didn't necessarily have all the nutrition for a race that was an hour longer than you had anticipated. Like, how did that sort of play out for your day?
I thought I did well. So I'm a very data geek and very analytical. So I had my Excel spreadsheet. I knew how much I wanted to my expected intake. So I was shooting for 120 grams per hour, which is roughly 0.6 or 0.6 per, I think it's per pound, based on my weight. So and that's what I had done in training before. It worked well, and I wanted to really front load the nutrition because it's easier to eat or drink when you're climbing than when you're going down because you need both hands and it's stressful already. So by special needs, I think I was almost like 2/3, almost 60% of my expected nutrition intake. I took a lot at the beginning and it worked well. What I probably underestimated is I'm used to riding in Georgia where it's very humid and you sweat all the time. I didn't sweat a lot, but I think but I probably sweat, I didn't realize it. And so I probably could have drinking more water or taken more water. And also because it took 7.5 hours, I was probably running low on nutrition. So on average, I probably took, 90 grams an hour instead of 110, 120. And maybe that's one of the reasons why my run it's one of the reasons. I think it's the aggregation of many things. The course was brutal. I was not trained for these sustained long efforts. Nutrition was a bit behind. The tri-bike versus the road bike. So it added a dimension of being all like stressed and the tension in my neck, in my shoulders, everywhere. And all of that contributes to you probably should have eaten more. And then when you're ready to run, then you don't have legs. They just disappear. So that's the nutrition. I read also that if you do 6 hours in the mountains versus 6 hours like a normal ride, you're going to consume way more nutrition or you should consume way more nutrition. So that's not what I did. I based everything off my experience here, but because I didn't really ride in the mountains, I didn't know that I should have upped or increased maybe. I should have found ways to get more nutrition. And so
that's super hard. That's, I think, the biggest outlier or the biggest challenge with the race. Mountains, you can say, oh, I've got to climb. I can do my math, FTP, watts per kilogram, this climb, 90 minutes, go train it. But it's another thing to be able to fuel the whole race in that, people talk about the heat or the wind in Kona sort of being the unknown factor. I think in Nice, it's almost more intimidating because exactly what you're walking into, right? It's not like, oh, maybe it's windy as that when you're like, the mountain's not going to be less mountain this year versus next year. And being able to eat is a huge piece. I think it's one of those things that people don't realize on courses that are not as difficult as Nice, that their math is close enough, right? It's like they say horseshoes and hand grenades, right? My feeling's close enough that I can be successful. But in an environment like that where you just you don't have a choice to do a certain rate of work for a certain period of time, it's very costly.
I think one thing is, and when we talked, Matt looked at my race and then noticed the same thing. When you climb for a long time, your heart rate doesn't stay where you want the heart rate to be, or you go super slow. And everybody was already passing me, so I was like, I was really not pushing it. But my heart rate at some point went to 140, then 145, and towards the end, on some section, I saw 150, 155, which is way, way too high. I'm used to seeing 120, 125, and I think it was the accumulation of fatigue and stress, and so your heart beats too fast, so therefore you should also probably eat more. But I thought about that afterwards. I was like, oh, this is odd, and then I should have it should have triggered the reaction, okay, eat more, drink more, because your body is working much harder than it should, because you should never be at 150. And that was not all the time, but that was for certain sections. And so all of that counts and depletes your energy.
Yeah,
So,
it does. It adds up. It gives you that kind of end of Ironman feeling vibe, but you haven't even started the marathon yet. But so tell me a little bit about the run and the aid stations. Like I've done Cabo, which was 4 10.5 kilometer pieces, five and a quarter out, 5.25 back ish. And I actually ended up liking it. It was like doing a couple, like I could do the math, like when I wanted to be back and I knew I would see these people again pretty soon. Under an hour, I would see people again. So I didn't feel like I was going off into nowhere.
Now that was great. It was mostly very positive for the reasons you just explained. There was a negative, which was when you're tired, you're at the beginning of the 5K loop, the 5K stretch, and you see where you need to go. It's basically from the start line to the airport, and you see the airport. You see exactly where it is, and you're like, oh my God, this is really far. I'm not going to go there. I said, well, it's not 5K, it's like 50K. This kind of mental pressure, it's not fun. But for the rest, you're right. And earlier, you were talking about the Tour de France. I'm not kidding. I have never seen anything like that, except one race I did a long time ago in France. And maybe I'm exaggerating, but that's really the way I remember it. So when I started, it felt almost like for 1 mile, you had people lined next to each other, like cheering you on. It was crazy. And then after the 1 mile, you still had a lot of people. They were not like next to each other, a bit more spaced out, but you had a lot of people. And I was very late in the day because I didn't even see Sam Laidlaw win. I mean, he had finished when I started. And we still had a lot of people. So I can only imagine. I saw when the pros finished. I think Sam Laidlaw said that when he finished the bike, he didn't have any legs. But people just carried him to the finish line because a French guy, and that's why he was so emotional. I think he was totally dead and destroyed like everybody else, but the fans carried him, and it was really unique. It was really fantastic, and everybody, you have your names, everybody was like, oh, so a lot of French people, but also a lot of foreigners. It was awesome. It was really good. So for me, that it was, my goal was to try to run slow and keep my heart rate low, but I didn't work very well. I started walking very early on because my heart rate was creeping 140, 145, and I was like, okay, I know what it means, walk. And then I was like, oh man, it's so good to walk. I cannot start running again. And then I was like, okay, run, walk, and then run to the light. And then I realized it would be a long day, but that was fun. I did everything I could, and I enjoyed, because what are you going to do? You're not going to cry, and you're not going to not finish. I spent a lot of time with myself, encouraging myself and saying, hey, look, and then looking at other people, because everybody was hurting. Some people were doing better, but it was painful for everybody. And then I was like, just enjoy. There's nothing else you can do. Run as much as you can, and then be in a good enjoy. What are you going to do? And so you're right. The 4 loops, it's probably, I like it because it's better if you run because it goes faster. If not, it took me way more than an hour to do each. And man, I have another 3 to do, another 2, but I finished. And I was running with Nam, so we saw each other a couple of times. And he was doing awesome. I mean, he had... So I was motivated. I was like, okay, run like Nam, but I couldn't. Like 100 meters, and then I was like, I can't. And I don't know why, and maybe it's because I'm sure he was hurting as much as I was. We rode the same course. So maybe it's what I wrote in my report. I had my why, but that was not enough. So I need to find ways to, work with myself so that I don't walk. And that's for next race. Yeah. For this one, it was the way it was, and I really enjoyed it. And so even when I finished, it was already dark, and there were still a lot of people. And then you're like 200 meters from the finish line, and you make a right instead of turning around again. And then you're on the red carpet. And I thought they did a great job, honestly. And everything I read about Nice, there were a lot of critical opinions before. But after, I think everybody said that was a heck of a race that Ironman put together. It was a great location, great venue, great course. And I'm hoping that people who choose not to go, pros or ex-groupers, they get a chance to race in 2 years' time, because it's really awesome. It's probably the hardest race I've ever raced, but it's good too. You don't always, it's not, it's going to be much slower than if you race Florida or Arizona, but in terms of experience, I probably went to some not necessarily dark places, but deep places that I didn't know existed. But that was good. It was, you can hear, it was, I loved it. Really.
Yeah, I think there's listen, I think it's easy to look at a snapshot in time and be like, someone like Nam had a race and you had a race and you're like, what's the difference? But I think there's also a timeline perspective to look at as well. What's all the things that got those other athletes to this point and what got you to this point? And I think your experience here where you suffered mightily, but persevered, enjoyed yourself strangely, but also suffered and was very emotional. I think that's a foundational step in your story. If we were to chart a hero's journey, where you can have success and versions of success. And at the time, it's the biggest success. But in the grand scheme of things, it's a stepping stone to something else. And I think you found going to the World Championships that there's a level of work and suffering beyond which you had really probably comprehended as possible. Like never occurred to you that it could be that a 7.5 hour bike was in the cards, that it would be that hard to run at mile 5 when you're like this is not on my radar. And I think it just changes. I think it really just changes how you think about your race and where you think you are. Whereas like old Vincent may have just been like, hey, this is a great year. Let's imagine you went 12.5. Hey, I had a good year, did good things next year. Yeah, whatever. And I think now you are in this position of looking ahead and being like, oh, okay, like there's room for me to grow, right? And there's room for me to get better. And so there's 2 ways to look at that. And I think this is, and in the future, when we look back on this in 5 years, you're going to be like, that was actually wasn't my greatest race, but it was possibly like the biggest impact on me as an athlete. So I think there's a net positive for you here.
No, I agree. And there are a lot of lessons learned, and that's the way you get better. One thing I didn't talk about is body composition is clearly something that you probably want to work on if you're going to on the mountains. And I was actually a little bit heavier than, I'm not a super light guy at all, but I was probably a bit heavier than I was last year. And I think everything gets compounded into pain. So if I were 20 pounds lighter, I think my run would have been a little bit, all things being equal, would have probably been easier because for heavier guys on flatter courses, you don't really have much of a penalty, I think. But the penalty grows exponentially when you take on hillier courses. And I had raced Wisconsin like 4 or 5 years ago. And same thing, I had a slow bike because it's always going up, and when you're heavier, it's a little bit more difficult. So that's a road bike, work on body comp, and then plus the other takeaways. But yes, you're right. I mean, you learn everything from every race, and here I was happy because I didn't have the race that I wanted to have, but I got better in a way. It's not about the time; it's also about the experience, the journey, and what you learn, so that you can continue growing. And from that standpoint, yes.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, huge. Like I can't say it enough. I think there's part of that story. I can go back and look at a couple races myself where I thought I was good. I didn't know what I didn't know, and it was like, oh, I'd actually unlocked a new level, which got harder. Tim Cronk talks about this all the time. That like when you achieve the thing you wanted to achieve, then there's another thing that's harder than the thing you just achieved. And you don't always have to go that direction, but I think there's a simplicity in that. And there's also just a sort of it kind of takes us to the core of what drives us in the first place, which is like, how do I face this challenge? How do I tackle it? What's it going to be? And I know I have to give it everything. And I think you found your match in that course, where that was an everything course you gave. It's not like you broke or you just didn't try hard enough and that's what you got. You were giving it everything you had. You're reaching back and there's nothing else back there, right? You're looking for another arrow. You're like, there's no more arrows back here. I'm just going to take this off and just throw it at the race. And there's something really powerful. Anyway, I want to say thank you for joining me and sharing out a little bit about the course for your race report as well. I know the women are racing next year. We already have, I think, 2 women have signed up recently who are doing Nice next year. So we have some knowledge capturing this. I'll put this interview in that space as well. But I think we are going to have to think long and hard about how we improve the 12 to 16 weeks into a race like Nice so people can truly be ready. So I'll be ready for sure.
Yeah, and I hope that a lot more people will be interested in Nice because it's not Kona, but it's probably as special as Kona in a different way. And I'm hoping that we will have many more people racing Nice So it's also, if it's a World Championship, but it's also a race that takes place every end of June. It's more or less part of the World Championship because you get the extra vibe and everything. But yeah, so I hope we get a lot of people in for women 2 years and for men another time in 2020. I know that I got my butt kicked. The course owes me a revenge, and I hope I that's my goal.
That's what I'm talking about. That's exactly what I'm talking about, Vincent, for sure. I think Kona, Nice, the debate rages, but for me, it's a place where you want to go and know that you're going to be tested, a place where you make memories that you'll take with you for forever. And I think Nice has checked that box for you, perhaps slightly more meaningful, just given who you are and your background, but that's part of what makes it special for all of us. So through you, we all got to live that experience without the discomfort, without the terrifying descents. But I hope many more of us do join you on the finishing podium there in terms of just getting a medal and knowing like you conquered that course. At the end of the day, you walked away a winner. It just sounds like it's 1.5 Konas on some level to me. I got to say, that's just brutal. I'll take being hot any day. Hot comes and goes. You can stop and be less hot. You can't say less mountain. You can't stop and have less to climb.
I didn't talk too much about it, but it was hot. It was freaking hot.
Oh, yeah. The best part is that wasn't necessarily the worst of your problem. There were bigger problems. Like in Kona, the heat, everyone's like, oh, the heat. It means if you're that much about the heat, then you're not really worried about the hills because it's the heat, right? Or the road surface, right? Like you had bigger first order problems. And I think that's what's going to really separate the race. And I do hope to see more people go there because I think it's just a different type of test. And there'll be some people who excel in that environment and others who are challenged. And it's just another opportunity to prove who can get it all together for the big day.
Absolutely.
All right. Outstanding. This has been fantastic, Vincent. Thank you again so much for your time. I'll let you know when we publish this. So it'll probably be like a week or two till we get around to it. But I'll be sure to put it in the team and give you lots of kudos. All right.
Thank you, Patrick.
You're welcome. I look forward to catching up and hatching a plan for next year once you're fully recovered.
Okay.
I know you got one more race to go.
Yeah,
Take care.
Okay.
See you. Bye-bye.
Endurance Nation.
Hey, podcast fans. I know you love the podcast because here you are, you're listening to it and you're still listening to me talk right now. Did you know you can get content just like this in your inbox once a month? We send out a great newsletter. We call it, guess what? The Unfair Advantage. That's right. It's our information to you, something that separates you from the competition. If they're not here, then they don't know. But if you are here, then now you do. Zero excuses. If you go check us out online at endurancenation.us/newsletter, it's your opportunity to enter your email address, sign up for these updates. They come once a month, sometimes twice a month, depending on my race schedule. And it's your chance to get insider information that's going to help you become a better, smarter athlete. Don't miss out on this chance to get ahead of the competition. It doesn't cost you any money, and it's not a ton of work. It's just your email address. That's endurancenation.us/newsletter.
For more information about Endurance Nation, visit us online at endurancenation.us. The provided music is from the Podshow Podsafe Music Network. Check it out at music.podshow.com.